These girls, only 6 years old, were seen in the rain by a millionaire, but they had a sinister plan, and the poor millionaire suffered terrible consequences for helping them. Comment what you think will happen. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support my work. The rain lashed against the windows of the Caldwell mansion on that frigid winter night in Chicago. Arthur Caldwell watched the downpour through the immense window of his living room, a space decorated with expensive furniture that only accentuated the emptiness of his solitary existence. The silence was broken only by the sound of raindrops, pelting the glass, and the occasional thunderclap that illuminated the dark sky. His tired eyes wandered across the cityscape when something caught his attention. Under the awning of the building next door, two small figures huddled, trying to escape the storm. Moving closer to the glass, Arthur distinguished two girls, no older than 7, embracing each other for warmth. The businessman's heart clenched as he watched the children trembling. Their soaked clothes clung to their fragile bodies, and even from a distance, he could perceive the helplessness in their expressions. For a moment, the image of his own daughter, Emily, flashed through his mind, a memory he had tried to bury for years. Arthur hesitated. Years of deceptions and betrayals had built a wall around his heart, a fortress that protected him from further suffering. But something about these girls stirred an old wound, an echo of his own history that he couldn't ignore. Defying all his instincts for self-preservation, he grabbed an umbrella and left the mansion. As he approached the children, he realized they were identical twins. Dark brown hair plastered to their faces, accentuated almond-shaped eyes that stared at him with a mixture of fear and hope. "You shouldn't be out here alone on a night like this," he said, trying to soften his naturally deep voice. "Where are your parents?" The girls exchanged glances, as if silently deciding whether they could trust him. It was the one on the right who finally spoke. "We can't go home." "Why not?" Arthur asked, crouching down to their level. "Our mom," the other twin began, but her voice failed. Tears began to stream down her face, mingling with the rainwater. "She hurts us," the first one completed. "And our dad, he's been gone for a long time." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. The girl's physical resemblance to Emily was unsettling, the same face shape, the same expressive eyes. "What are your names?" "I'm Samia," replied the one who seemed stronger. "And she's Mirella." A thunderous clap cut through the sky, making Mirella shrink even further. Arthur looked at his mansion, then at the two helpless children. He knew he should call the authorities immediately, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the vulnerability in their eyes, or perhaps it was his own ghosts that haunted him, that stormy night. "Would you like to come inside? At least until the rain stops?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Samia's face lit up with cautious hope, while Mirella only gripped her sister's hand tighter. Arthur led them to the mansion, aware that he was breaking all the rules of common sense he had established for himself over the years. Inside the house, the housekeeper, Mrs. Davison, quickly provided towels and dry clothes for the girls. While they changed, Arthur remained in his study, restless. The memories he tried so hard to keep locked away began to surface. The day he lost everything, the looks of disdain, the cruel words of his wife when she left, taking Emily with her. When he returned to the living room, he found the twins sitting on the sofa, now warm and dry, but still visibly frightened. Mrs. Davison had prepared hot chocolate, and the girls drank in small sips, their eyes constantly watchful. "You can spend the night here," he said, surprising himself again. "We'll sort this out in the morning." The girls exchanged another enigmatic look between themselves. There was something about that silent exchange that intrigued Arthur, but he brushed the feeling aside. He was just being paranoid, as always. Later, after Mrs. Davison settled them into one of the guest rooms, Arthur remained awake in his library, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table. The sound of the rain continued steadily, like a reminder of the impulsive decision he had made. Amid his unease, he didn't immediately notice the soft footsteps in the hallway. When he finally did, he saw a shadow pass quickly through the crack under the door. He got up, intrigued, but when he opened the door, he found only the empty and silent hallway. He went upstairs to check on the girls. The room was locked. He knocked gently, calling for them, but received no answer. Only silence and the growing feeling that something strange was happening in his house, something he couldn't explain. Morning arrived with a pale light that barely penetrated the heavy clouds that still covered Chicago. Arthur hadn't been able to sleep, his worries fueled by the strange events of the previous night. When he finally decided to get up, he found Mrs. Davison already awake, preparing breakfast in the mansion's spacious kitchen. "The girls haven't come down yet," informed the housekeeper, her face revealing concern. "I went to check on them earlier, but the door remains locked. Don't you think we should call the police, Mr. Caldwell?" He shook his head negatively, although a voice in his mind screamed that this would be the wisest decision. "I'll try to talk to them first." He climbed the stairs, his footsteps echoing through the silent house. As he approached the guest room, he noticed something strange, a small dark stain on the beige carpet in the hallway. Approaching, he realized it was dried mud. Following the trail with his eyes, he discovered more stains that formed a path to his study downstairs. Before he could investigate further, he heard the sound of the bedroom door opening. Samia appeared first, her face showing a calmness that seemed out of place in a child who had run away from home the night before. Mirella emerged soon after, clinging to her sister's hand as always, but her eyes were red and swollen. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," said Samia, her voice too controlled for her age. "Sorry we didn't answer earlier." Mirella was very scared. The businessman studied the two for a moment. There was something in Samia's posture, in the way she placed herself slightly ahead of her sister, that intrigued him. "Did you sleep well?" Mirella only nodded, while Samia answered with a firm yes. The two were wearing the same clothes, and borrowed from the previous night, but Arthur noticed that the hem of Samia's pajamas was slightly stained with dirt. "We need to talk about what happened," he said, guiding them to the living room. "You need to tell me more about your mom." The moment they sat down, Mirella began to cry silently. Samia put her arm around her sister's shoulders, casting an almost adult look at Arthur. "Our mom, she's not a good person," Samia began. "Ever since Dad left, she started drinking a lot. Sometimes she gets really angry and—" Her voice faltered for the first time, revealing a vulnerability that her words tried to hide. Arthur felt his heart clench. The story sounded too familiar, echoing his own experiences with his father's alcoholism decades ago. Maybe that's why he felt so compelled to help. He saw in the girls the same helplessness he had felt in childhood. "Please," Samia pleaded, her eyes suddenly brimming with tears. "Don't send us back. She'll hurt us again." At that moment, Mrs. Davison entered the room carrying a breakfast tray. As she served the girls, she exchanged a meaningful look with Arthur. The housekeeper had worked for him for over 2 decades and knew well the signs of when her boss was about to make an impulsive decision. "Mr. Caldwell," she called discreetly, "can I have a word?" In the kitchen, away from the girls' ears, Mrs. Davison expressed her concern. "You need to notify the authorities. You can't just keep 2 children here without anyone knowing." "I know, Davison," he replied, running a hand over his tired face, "but something isn't right about this story. I need to understand it better before involving other people." When they returned to the living room, they found only Mirella sitting on the sofa. Samia had disappeared. "Where's your sister?" Arthur asked, trying to remain calm. Mirella only pointed towards the hallway, her eyes fixed on the floor. Arthur hurried along the indicated path, finding more mud marks on the carpet. The stains led to his study, the door of which was ajar. Upon entering, he found Samia rummaging through his desk. The girl quickly hid something behind her back, but she wasn't fast enough. Arthur saw that it was a key. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice firmer than he intended. I was just curious," she replied, but her tone didn't match the calculating expression on her face. "Your house is so big and beautiful." Before Arthur could question her further, the phone on his desk began to ring. The number was unknown. When he answered, he heard only heavy breathing on the other end of the line, followed by a click. That wouldn't be the last strange call he would receive. Throughout the day, the phone rang several times, always with the same pattern: unknown numbers, silence, and abrupt hang-ups. At night, after the girls went to sleep, again locked in their room, Arthur decided to check his study. He opened drawers and cabinets, trying to identify if anything was missing or had been tampered with. That's when he noticed the safe key, which he always kept hidden in a false drawer, had disappeared. He approached the safe built into the wall, his heart racing. The lock showed no signs of tampering, but something told him he needed to check its contents. He used the spare key. He kept in another location, and upon opening the heavy door, his blood ran cold. Some important documents were out of order, as if someone had handled them in a hurry. A noise in the hallway made him turn sharply. Through the open door, he saw a shadow pass quickly. He ran there, but again found only silence. Turning his gaze to the floor, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Small footprints of fresh dirt marked the carpet, heading towards the girls' room. The next morning, Arthur woke up with a severe headache after another sleepless night. The discoveries in the study disturbed him deeply, but something prevented him from taking more drastic action towards the girls. Perhaps it was Mirella's frightened expression, or the way Samia, despite her suspicious behavior, so resembled his Emily. During breakfast, he observed the twins more carefully. Mirella barely touched her food, while Samia ate methodically, her eyes occasionally meeting Arthur's with a disconcerting intensity. The silence was broken only by the clinking of silverware and the sound of rain that continued to fall outside. "We need to buy you some clothes," he said finally. "You can't keep wearing the same things every day." The suggestion made Mirella lift her head for the first time that morning, a small glimmer of interest in her eyes. Samia, however, seemed tense. "We don't need to go out," she said quickly. "We're fine like this." "Nonsense," intervened Mrs. Davison, who had just entered the dining room. "Children need proper clothes. I can take them to the mall nearby." "No!" Samia's response was so abrupt that everyone at the table jumped. "I mean, we'd rather stay here with Mr. Caldwell." The businessman noticed a quick exchange of glances between the sisters. Mirella seemed to want to say something, but a stern look from Samia made her lower her head again. "All right," he conceded. "We can order some things online." After breakfast, Arthur retreated to his study, determined to investigate the situation further. He called some acquaintances, trying to obtain information about recent cases of missing children in the area. To his surprise, no one had reported the disappearance of twin girls. While making the calls, he noticed movement in the hallway. Through the crack in the door, he saw Samia pass hurriedly, carrying something in her hands. He followed her silently to the library, where he found her messing with his old cell phone, a device he had kept stored in a drawer for years. "What are you doing?" he asked, making the girl jump in fright. I just wanted to play a game," she replied, but her hands trembled as she returned the device. Arthur took the cell phone and checked the history. There was an attempt to call a number he didn't recognize. When he questioned Samia about it, she simply ran out of the library. The situation became even stranger when, that afternoon, Mrs. Davison reported that some objects had disappeared from the house: a silver picture frame, some antique jewelry that belonged to Arthur's mother, and even important documents that were kept in his desk. "Something very wrong is happening here," said the housekeeper, her voice filled with concern. "You need to do something." Arthur agreed, but before he could do anything, he heard a scream coming from upstairs. He ran up there, finding Mirella lying on the hallway floor, crying copiously. Samia was beside her, trying to calm her down. "What happened?" he asked, helping Mirella up. "She tripped," Samia replied quickly. "It was nothing." But Mirella, between sobs, muttered something different. "I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to—" "Do what?" Arthur asked, but Samia was already pulling her sister away, whispering something in her ear that made her shut up immediately. That night, after the girls had retired, Arthur decided to do a more thorough search of the house. In the guest room, where they slept, he found, hidden under the bed, a manila envelope containing old photos. Photos of him with Emily and his ex-wife, which were supposed to be stored in his safe. Even more disturbing was finding, inside the same envelope, newspaper clippings about his history, the bankruptcy, the reconstruction of his fortune, recent reports about his business dealings. Someone had done a detailed background check on his life. While examining the documents, he heard a creak coming from the hallway. Upon leaving the room, he saw a small figure disappear quickly down the back stairs that led to a side door of the mansion, which he was sure he had locked earlier. He followed in that direction, his footsteps echoing through the silent house. The back door was ajar, letting in the cold night air. Outside, in the dimness of the garden, he distinguished a male silhouette that quickly disappeared upon noticing his presence. Alarmed, Arthur ran back inside the house, heading to the girls' room. He found only Mirella, huddled in her bed, trembling. "Where's your sister?" he asked, trying to remain calm. She'll be back soon," Mirella replied, her voice almost inaudible. "She always comes back." "What's going on, Mirella? Please, tell me the truth." The girl began to cry again, but this time between sobs, words began to escape. "Dad said we needed to, that it was the only way." Before she could continue, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Samia appeared at the door, her clothes slightly dirty with dirt. Upon seeing the scene, her sister crying and Arthur there, her face took on an expression that mixed fear and anger. "Mirella, shut up!" she shouted, running to hug her sister. "You promised." Arthur stood there, paralyzed, as the pieces began to fall into place in his mind. The mysterious calls, the missing objects, the mud stains, the figure in the garden. Everything pointed to something much bigger than two girls, running away from an abusive mother. But before he could demand explanations, the phone in his pocket vibrated. On the screen, an unknown number. When he answered, a male voice, filled with bitterness, whispered, "Enjoy it while you can, boss. Soon you'll understand what it's like. You'd lose everything for real." The threat on the phone disturbed Arthur for the rest of the night. That voice, there was something familiar about it, like a distant memory that he couldn't quite reach. Lying in his bed, he mentally reviewed the events of the last few days, trying to connect the loose ends of this increasingly complex story. The next morning, he decided to do something he should have done from the beginning: investigate the neighborhood. He took advantage of the fact that the girls were still asleep and left early, visiting the nearby houses under the guise of organizing a neighborhood watch meeting. It was at the third house that he found something significant. An elderly lady, Mrs. Peterson, upon hearing his question about strange movements on the street, adjusted her glasses and replied with interest. "Oh, you must be talking about that. A poor woman who's been looking for her daughters," she said, pouring coffee into an antique china cup. "She's been here several times in recent weeks. Very distressed. Twins, from what I understand. Even left posters with photos." Arthur's heart raced. "Do you still have any of those posters?" Mrs. Peterson got up with difficulty and went to a drawer in the china cabinet. From there, she took out a slightly crumpled piece of paper. On it, Arthur saw the smiling faces of Samia and Mirella embracing a woman of tired but kind appearance. Below the photo, there was a phone number and a desperate plea. Looking for my daughters. Please, any information is important. Their mother was here just the day before yesterday, continued Mrs. Peterson. Poor thing, she was a wreck. Said the girls disappeared after leaving school. She works 2 jobs to support them since her husband disappeared. The story didn't match what the girls had told him. Where was the violent alcoholic mother they described? The woman in the poster looked like anything but a person capable of hurting her own daughters. Returning home, Arthur found Mrs. Davison in a state of agitation. Thank goodness you're here. Something very strange happened while you were gone. The housekeeper reported that while cleaning the study, she found several sheets of paper torn in the trash can. Upon piecing them together, she realized that they were pieces of an important document, the purchase agreement for the land where Arthur planned to build his new development. But there's more, she continued, lowering her voice. I heard the girls talking in their room. Samia was angry with Mirella, saying that she needed to stop crying and stick to the plan, that their father was counting on them. At that moment, they heard a noise coming from upstairs. Upon going up, they found the door to the girls' room open, something unusual since Samia always insisted on keeping it locked. Inside the room, Mirella was alone, sitting on the bed with a terrified look on her face. Where's your sister? Arthur asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She went to do what he told her to do, replied Mirella, her voice trembling. But I can't take it anymore. I don't want to lie anymore. Before she could continue, Samia burst into the room. Her normally controlled face was red with anger. I told you to be quiet. Do you want him to hurt us again? Who's going to hurt you? Insisted Arthur, blocking the door so that Samia couldn't escape this time. Please, tell me the truth. Samia looked at Mirella with a warning expression, but her sister, for the first time, was not intimidated. Our father, said Mirella, the words coming out like a torrent. He said he needed to get revenge on the man who destroyed our life. He said that if we didn't do what he told us to do, he would— Shut up, shouted Samia, tears of frustration streaming down her face. You're ruining everything. At that moment, Arthur's phone rang again. The same unknown number. With his heart pounding, he answered, putting it on speakerphone. Your little brats can't keep their mouths shut, can they? The male voice sounded even more familiar this time. That's okay. We already got what we needed anyway. Now we just wait for the show to begin. It was then that Arthur finally recognized the voice. It was Saul, his former chauffeur, the man he had fired years ago during his bankruptcy phase. Saul had begged to keep his job, saying his wife was pregnant with twins, that he needed the work more than ever. Saul? Arthur's voice came out trembling. What do you want? A bitter laugh sounded from the other end of the line. What do I want? I want you to feel what it's like to lose everything, you bastard. You fired me when I needed you the most, humiliated me in front of everyone. You know what happened after. In that, my wife almost died in childbirth. I had to scrape by doing odd jobs to support the girls. And you bounced back, got richer than ever while I— The call dropped abruptly. Arthur looked at the girls, especially at Samia, who was now crying openly, her entire facade of strength crumbling. He said he would hurt our mom if we didn't do what he told us to do, she sobbed. Said we needed to get into your house, take important documents, destroy things. He's crazy, Mr. Caldwell. Since he came back a few months ago, he's not been the same. Mirella approached her sister, hugging her. He drinks a lot, gets violent. Our mom tried to protect us, but he found out where we lived. That's why she was looking for us, not because we went missing from school, but because he took us. The revelation hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. All this time, He had been manipulated not only by the girls, but by a man consumed by the desire for revenge, a man who didn't hesitate to use his own daughters as pawns in his game of retaliation. Before he could fully process this information, Mrs. Davison rushed into the room. "Mr. Caldwell, there are police officers downstairs. They say they received a kidnapping report." Arthur's world collapsed the moment the police officers entered his house. Handcuffed and humiliated, he was taken away under the curious gaze of the neighbors who crowded the street. The successful businessman, respected throughout Chicago, was now being treated like a common criminal. At the police station, the charges seemed endless. Kidnapping of minors, unlawful imprisonment, even suspicion of child endangerment. His reputation, built over years of hard work, was being destroyed in a matter of hours. The newspaper headlines didn't forgive. Millionaire businessman arrested for kidnapping twins. In his cell, Arthur thought about the girls. Despite everything, he couldn't feel anger towards them. They were just scared children, manipulated by a vengeful father. What worried him most was the fate of the twins now that they were back under Saul's power. Mrs. Davison, loyal as always, was the first to visit him. She brought not only clean clothes but also important news. "I got the contact information for the girl's mother," she whispered, after making sure no one was listening. "Her name is Regina. She's desperate, Mr. Caldwell. She said Saul disappeared with the girls weeks ago after she refused to go back to him." Arthur felt a pang in his chest. "How did you find her?" "Through that lady, Mrs. Peterson. She had saved the number from the missing person poster. Regina told me everything about how Saul came back after years, saying he had changed, that he wanted a chance with his daughters, but it was all a lie." The housekeeper continued, her voice trembling with indignation. "He was drunk when he showed up at her house, shouting about revenge, about getting justice. Regina tried to stop him, but he took the girls by force. She searched everywhere, but he always changed hiding places. And now, where are they?" "With him," replied Mrs. Davison, her eyes filling with tears. "Regina said that Saul called her yesterday, boasting about how he had managed to destroy you. Said that now he's going to disappear with the girls for good." The news fell like a bomb. Arthur spent the night awake, tossing and turning in his cell, thinking about how those innocent children were paying the price for a revenge they didn't even fully understand. The next morning, his lawyer brought more worrying information. The police had found several personal belongings of the girls in his house, strategically planted by Saul to incriminate him even further. They also discovered suspicious bank transfers, all forged to make it look like Arthur was paying to keep the children in captivity. "He planned everything meticulously," explained the lawyer. "He used his knowledge as a former employee to access your bank details, forged documents, created a false trail that led straight to you. But then something unexpected happened. Mirella, no longer able to bear the weight of guilt and the fear of her father, ran away. The girl managed to reach Regina's house, her mother, and together they went to the police to tell the whole truth. Mirella's testimony was devastating. Through tears, she revealed how her father forced them to participate in his revenge plan. How he forced them to rummage through Arthur's house at night, looking for documents and objects that could incriminate him. How he threatened to hurt them and their mother if they didn't cooperate. He kept drinking and saying that Mr. Caldwell had destroyed our family, Mirella told the investigators. But it wasn't true. "He's the one who abandoned us. He's the one who made our mother cry every night. Mr. Caldwell was only good to us." Regina, hugging her daughter, completed the account with her own story of abuse and fear. She told how Saul had disappeared when the girls were babies, how she struggled alone to raise her daughters, working 2 jobs, and how, when he returned, he brought with him only bitterness and violence. "He changed completely," she said. "He lived talking about how he was going to get revenge on his former boss, how he was going to get justice. I tried to argue, said he was wrong, that his dismissal was fair, that he himself had caused it with his irresponsibility. But he didn't listen. It only got worse every day. The police immediately launched a search for Saul and Samia. Regina was convinced that he planned to leave the country with the girl. She had found plane tickets and false documents in his old apartment. Arthur, even still detained, used all his resources to help with the searches. He hired private investigators, offered a reward for information, mobilized his contacts. He couldn't sleep thinking about Samia in the hands of that disturbed man. It was days of anguish until finally a concrete lead emerged. A gas station attendant on the highway recognized Saul and Samia from a photo in the newspapers. They had stopped to refuel in the early morning. The girl seemed scared and cried a lot. The police set up an operation to intercept them. When they found Saul's car abandoned on a back road, everyone's fear increased. Tire tracks indicated that he had left in a hurry, probably realizing he was being followed. It was Samia who, showing surprising courage for her age, managed to call for help. Taking advantage of a moment when her father passed out after drinking too much at a cheap roadside motel, she used the front desk phone to call her mother. "Mom," she whispered, afraid of waking Saul. "We're at a motel near a yellow church. There's a gas station in front. Please come get us. I'm very scared." The discovery of Saul's whereabouts coincided with Arthur's release. All charges against him were dropped after Mirella's revelations and the evidence found in Saul's apartment. Even so, he made a point of personally accompanying Samia's rescue. When the police finally stormed the motel room, they found Saul completely drunk, incoherently muttering about revenge and justice. Samia was huddled in a corner, clutching a small backpack where she kept, among other things, a photo she had stolen from Arthur's house, the only image he had with his daughter Emily. The reunion between Regina and her daughters was a scene that moved even the most experienced police officers. The girls ran into their mother's arms, the three crying and hugging as if they never wanted to let go. Arthur watched from a distance, his heart heavy with a mixture of relief and melancholy. Saul was taken into custody, still muttering disconnected threats. The man Arthur had met years ago, a dedicated employee who had just lost his way due to alcoholism, was now completely transformed by resentment and addiction. His revenge plan not only failed, but also destroyed any chance of redemption with his family. In the days that followed, as the dust settled and the press gradually lost interest in the story, Arthur found himself confronting his own demons. The photo that Samia had taken, the only image he kept of Emily, awakened memories he had long tried to suppress. "She gave me back the photo," said Samia a few days later, when she came with Regina and Mirella to visit Arthur at his mansion. The girl was different, the weight of guilt and fear finally removed from her small shoulders. "I'm sorry for taking it, it's just, you looked so happy in it." Arthur took the photograph with trembling hands. In it, a 5-year-old Emily smiled in his lap, both sitting on a park bench. It was taken a few months before everything fell apart, before his wife left, taking his only daughter. "You know," continued Samia, her voice small but determined, "when Dad showed us this photo, he said you were a bad man who destroyed families, but I saw how you looked at it every night when you thought no one was watching. You looked so sad." Regina, who until then had maintained a respectful distance, approached. "Arthur, I have no words to express my gratitude. Despite everything that Saul and the girls did, you still helped find them. You still cared about their well-being." "They are just children," he replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Children who, like my Emily, were victims of the wrong choices of the adults in their lives." It was then that Mrs. Davison, who had been watching the scene in silence, made a suggestion that would change the course of all those wounded lives. Regina works 2 jobs to support the girls, Mr. Caldwell. And you always said you needed someone trustworthy to manage the downtown restaurant. The suggestion took everyone by surprise. Regina blushed, embarrassed. Oh no, I couldn't accept. After everything that happened. Why not? Interrupted Arthur, an idea beginning to form in his mind. You have experience in the business, don't you? Mrs. Davison mentioned that one of your jobs is as a restaurant supervisor. Well, yes, but then it's decided, he declared, feeling for the first time in years a real purpose in his life. The restaurant needs a manager, and your daughters need a more present mother. It's a solution that benefits everyone. In the months that followed, a silent but profound transformation took place in the lives of everyone involved. Regina, free from the need to work 2 jobs, finally had time to dedicate herself to her daughters. Under her management, Arthur's restaurant flourished, becoming one of the most popular in the area. Samia and Mirella, receiving adequate psychological support, gradually overcame the traumas caused by their father. The girls often visited the Caldwell mansion, filling its previously silent hallways with laughter and play. Arthur, who for so long had closed himself off to any kind of affection, found himself looking forward to these visits. It was during one of those afternoons, while watching the twins playing in the garden, that Arthur received a call that he had feared and secretly hoped for years. It was Emily, his daughter, now a 23-year-old young woman. Dad. Her voice sounded hesitant on the other end of the line. I saw your name in the newspapers. All that story with the girls. I was worried. Arthur felt his heart stop for a moment. Emily, I'm sorry for not looking for you before, she continued, her voice choked with emotion. Mom always said that. Well, that doesn't matter now. I wanted to know if we could try to fix things. While talking to Emily, arranging a meeting for the following week, Arthur watched Samia and Mirella playing with a dog they had recently adopted. Regina, sitting on a garden bench, supervised the game while reviewing some restaurant documents. It was then that he understood. His heart, which for so long had been closed by the fear of betrayal and abandonment, had been broken open by the force of love and compassion. The twins, even in their initial attempt to harm him, had inadvertently given him a precious gift, the ability to forgive and to love again. You know what's funny? He commented to Mrs. Davison, who had joined him on the porch. Saul wanted to make me lose everything, but ended up making me gain something I didn't, even though I needed a family. The housekeeper smiled, her eyes tearful. You always had a good heart. You just needed to remember that. That night, after everyone had left, Arthur sat in his library with the photo of Emily. Next to it, he placed a new photograph taken that afternoon, him with Regina and the twins, all smiling at the camera. 2 images that represented not only his past and his present, but also the promise of a future where forgiveness and love were stronger than any desire for revenge. In his cell, Saul regularly received letters from Samia and Mirella. The girls, showing a capacity for forgiveness that only children possess, kept in touch with their father, hoping that one day he could find the peace that he so lacked. Regina, although hurt, allowed this communication, understanding that the healing process involved not only forgiving, but also understanding. The following week, when Emily finally visited the mansion, she found not only a father eager to reconnect, but an expanded family, built not by blood ties, but by choices of love and forgiveness. Samia and Mirella, enchanted with their older sister, immediately included her in their games and confidences. Watching his daughter interact with the twins, Arthur finally understood that sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters. His fortune, which for so long had been his only source of pride and security, now seemed small compared to the wealth of having people who genuinely cared about him. Saul's revenge plan, although born of hatred and resentment, ended up having a completely opposite effect to the intended one. Instead of destroying Arthur, it provided everyone with a profound lesson about the importance of forgiveness and the true nature of family. In the end, the greatest revenge against hate was simply choosing to love.